The stagecoach rolled into Dry Creek just before sunset, its wheels grinding against the dusty road like a tired animal refusing to stop. The small western town stirred with curiosity, but no one watched more closely than the tall man standing outside the post office. Daniel Hayes didn't believe in surprises anymore. Not after everything he'd lost. He leaned against the wooden railing, arms crossed, his weathered hat casting a shadow over sharp gray eyes that had seen too many hard winters. The townsfolk called him the loner rancher. Some said he preferred the company of horses to people. Others whispered that heartbreak had carved the silence into his soul. Daniel didn't care what they said. He was only there because the letter in his pocket had forced him to come. A letter written in elegant handwriting from a distant matchmaker in St. Louis. Your bride will arrive on the Tuesday stagecoach. Daniel had scoffed when he read it weeks earlier. He had written to the agency only half seriously after his ranch hands started teasing him about dying alone. He expected the whole thing to fall apart before it ever reached this dusty town. But now the stagecoach had arrived. And his stomach tightened. The driver pulled the horses to a halt. Dust drifted through the warm evening air as the door creaked open. A man stepped out first. Then an elderly woman. Daniel relaxed slightly. Maybe the letter had been a mistake after all. But then, a gloved hand appeared in the doorway. And the entire town seemed to hold its breath. A woman stepped down slowly from the coach. She was tall, poised, and breathtakingly beautiful in a deep blue traveling dress that caught the fading sunlight. Dark hair flowed beneath a small hat, and her eyes, sharp, intelligent, and surprisingly calm, scanned the town like someone measuring the world. Daniel's body stiffened. His voice came out under his breath. That can't be my bride. The woman looked directly at him. And then she smiled. Dry Creek erupted in whispers. Men who had spent their lives around rough cattle and dusty trails suddenly forgot how to breathe. Even the saloon piano inside the Silver Spur stopped mid-song as someone leaned out the window to get a better look. The woman approached Daniel with confident steps. You must be Mr. Daniel Hayes, she said. Her voice was warm but steady, like someone used to being listened to. Daniel blinked. I think there's been some mistake. She tilted her head slightly, amused. You did write to the Western Frontier Marriage Agency, didn't you? Well, yeah. And you are Daniel Hayes, owner of the Lone Ridge Ranch. That's right. She extended her gloved hand. Then there's no mistake. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I believe I'm your bride. Daniel stared at her hand like it was a rattlesnake. Behind them, 3 ranch hands watching from the hitching post burst into laughter. One of them shouted, Danny, you forgot to tell us you ordered an angel. Daniel shot them a glare that could have frozen whiskey. Then he looked back at Eleanor. You don't belong here. The words slipped out harsher than he intended. For a moment something flickered in her eyes, hurt, maybe, but she hid it quickly. I suppose that depends on where. Here is, she replied calmly. Here is dust, cattle, long winters, and hard work. Good, she said. Daniel frowned. Good. Yes. That's exactly what I came for. The town watched as Daniel stood there, completely unprepared for the woman who had just entered his life like a storm rolling across the plains. Finally he sighed. You better come with me. He grabbed her suitcase and started toward the hitching post where his horse waited. Eleanor followed without hesitation. The ride to Lone Ridge Ranch took nearly an hour. The sky faded into deep purples and oranges while the prairie stretched endlessly around them. Eleanor sat behind Daniel on the horse, holding the saddle carefully as the wind tugged at her dress. Most women from the east would have complained within minutes. Eleanor said nothing, but she observed everything. The hills, the cattle grazing in distant fields, the long wooden fences stretching across the land. Finally she asked quietly, You built all this yourself? Daniel shrugged. Started with nothing. Just land nobody wanted. That's impressive. He didn't answer. Compliments felt strange after years of silence. When they finally reached the ranch house, Eleanor looked at the modest wooden cabin glowing in lantern light. It's beautiful. Daniel chuckled dryly. You're the first person who's ever said that. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and leather. The furniture was simple but sturdy. Daniel set her suitcase down. There's stew on the stove if you're hungry. Eleanor removed her hat and gloves, revealing long dark hair cascading down her shoulders. I am. They ate quietly for a while. But Daniel couldn't stop stealing glances at her. Nothing about her made sense. Her posture. Her manners. The way she held a spoon like someone raised in fine society. Finally he asked the question burning in his mind. Why? Eleanor looked up. Why what? Why come here? Women like you marry bankers or lawyers, not lonely ranchers. She studied him carefully before answering. Because comfort isn't the same as happiness. Daniel frowned. That doesn't explain it. She took a breath. My father arranged a marriage for me in Boston. A wealthy man twice my age. A man who cared more about my family name than me. Daniel leaned back in his chair. So you ran away. I chose a different life. She looked around the cabin again. One where I could actually matter. Daniel didn't know what to say. The idea that someone would trade ballrooms for barbed wire seemed impossible. But Eleanor was here, and she wasn't leaving. Over the next few weeks, Dry Creek witnessed something remarkable. The elegant woman from the Stagecoach didn't disappear back east. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves. She learned to cook over a wood stove. She rode horses. She even helped mend fences. At first Daniel expected her to quit. Every blister on her hands made him think tomorrow she'd pack her bags. But tomorrow never came. One afternoon a storm rolled across the prairie faster than expected. The ranch hands rushed to move the cattle before lightning scattered the herd. Daniel rode out with them. Hours later, soaked and exhausted, he returned to find lanterns glowing in the barn. Inside, Eleanor stood calmly organizing blankets and hot coffee for the drenched workers. One of the men whispered to Daniel, "Boss, she's tougher than half of us." Daniel watched her laughing with the crew. Something inside his chest shifted. For the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel empty. But peace rarely lasts forever in the frontier. One night a group of cattle thieves slipped onto the property. Gunshots shattered the silence. Daniel rushed outside to confront them. The confrontation turned violent fast. But Eleanor refused to hide. She grabbed a lantern and ran to warn the ranch hands. Her quick thinking rallied the men, and together they drove the thieves away. When it was over, Daniel found her standing in the yard, shaking but determined. "You could have been hurt," he said. "So could you." Their eyes met in the lantern light. For the first time, Daniel realized something terrifying. He cared. Weeks later the town gathered again at the small church in Dry Creek. But this time there were no whispers of disbelief. Only smiles. Because the loner rancher who once believed he would spend his life alone now stood at the altar. And walking toward him in a simple white dress was the woman who had stepped off that stagecoach and changed everything. When Eleanor reached him, Daniel took her hands. Months earlier he had said, "You don't belong here." Now he spoke softly. "You were exactly what this place needed." Eleanor smiled. "And you were exactly what I was searching for." Outside, the prairie wind moved gently through the grass as the sun rose over Lone Ridge Ranch. A place that once held only silence now held laughter, hope, and a future neither of them had expected. Because sometimes the life we fear the most is the very one that saves us.